Data storytellers. Today on the podcast, I have with me Gene Tabach, and Gene is the director of data science over at Instacart, and we're going to have an exciting conversation today. Gene, welcome on the show.
Thanks. Super excited to be here. This is actually the first ever time I'm doing a podcast, so fun experience for me.
Okay, well, actually, my co-founder and co-host on the podcast, Paul, already told me that you guys are working on some interesting stuff, and I was excited to explore. Yeah, and today we'll talk about all things data. You do have a very interesting background. So you spent some time at Capital One, Google, Facebook, and Instacart. It's an exciting and rapidly growing organization. So first of all, just exploring your professional journey a little bit. What got you into data science to begin with? How did you end up here?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I've listened to a couple of your podcasts. I feel like every person says the same thing. But, when I went to college, I never really thought about or knew about data science. Actually, when I went to college, I'm dating myself a little bit, like data science didn't really exist. I think it was called statistics back then or something else. I actually went to college for mechanical engineering. I wanted to build cars and spaceships. I discovered through doing internships that mechanical engineering isn't really building cars and spaceships. It's like a lot of power plants and air conditioning and stuff. And that wasn't really very interesting to me. My favorite part was honestly always solving problems. And so, I got a master's degree and I just wanted to find jobs that were problem solving type of jobs. And at the time it was a lot of banking and consulting. So chose to go into banking. At Capital One, I think there's a lot of, it's a very diverse company. So there's one, my role of business analyst, you could have done a variety of different things. So you could focus on marketing, focus on search engine optimization, focus on analytics and modeling. And I chose to kind of spend a little bit more of my time on analytics and modeling. So I worked on the credit card model there. So if during the years of 2012 to 2014, you didn't like the credit limit your Capital One card gave you, I guess you could blame me. From there, I think it kind of doing this job, I wanted that at that point, it's more minute tweaks to my career. So it was I really actually didn't really like working in credit cards. I found the actual product to be a little bit boring. So I started just applying to a bunch of tech companies because I wanted to work on products that I really enjoyed using. Google, where I ended up going, was obviously one of those. At the time, Google was everyone's favorite product to use. And I applied to a bunch of others as well, even Sony or places like that. After joining Google, I was there for 2 or 3 years. I think again, kind of small tweaks. I discovered the area I worked in wasn't super close to the central product. It was effectively a marketing analytics type of function. So great company, super interesting product space, but I felt we weren't really core to central decision making. We were core to marketing decision making, but even marketing was pretty removed from the main products. So at that point, I had an opportunity at Facebook to work on the central newsfeed products, and so that's kind of exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on something important, something that's at the center of the company. So I went there. Things ended up working out pretty well. I feel I got really lucky with a great manager and a role that was kind of played to my strengths. So I stuck around there for I think almost 6 years. Kind of moving from a somewhat junior data science role into more of a leadership role over a long period of time. And then, 5 or 6 years is a very long time to spend anywhere. And, a lot of things are changing within the company. And, some people that I had worked with in the past that also moved to Instacart, and Instacart is something I discovered it's really important to me at Facebook is I need to be able to work on products I personally resonate with and personally really like. I think unlike most people my age, I probably spend an hour a day on Facebook. So I really like Facebook. So that really helped me, have impact there and feel really connected to the product. So Instacart, for me, it was probably the biggest value add to my life because I hate grocery shopping and it takes me 3 or 4 hours to go grocery shopping. So the fact that I could get this stuff delivered to my door is just amazing. And a lot of people I know kind of moved over there. There was a really good opportunity that came up. And so, I decided to take it. And here I am. It's been, I think, 5 months now.
Okay, well, quite a journey there. And well, you mentioned about credit card. So credit cards, MasterCard is one of our member organizations. I'm gonna give them a heads up so that they don't take it personally. But
no, it's this. I do want to kind of touch on this point though. I think like different things are important to different people. I think like a lot of people I interview like absolutely don't care about the product they work on. They care about the data problems. And there's like the actual data problems in credit are super interesting because you have such an amazing wealth of data and like it's very mature. But just like for me, like I realized like, okay, that's nice to have, but like actually like working on a product that I find like I'm passionate about is more important. So varies by person.
Absolutely. I can definitely relate. I mean, we build the data storytellers on that foundation of you got to be passionate about it. And I 100% see where you're coming from. Just a quick question on your time at Facebook. So head of ecosystem data science, just out of interest. So what did it actually cover? This was the time when Facebook started to create like a whole ecosystem of different applications. And then your job was to basically figure out how that all interconnects and how that can be value driven from analytics in that space. Was that the role?
That's actually like a surprisingly good description of it, but I'll give a little bit more detail. So, I mean, you probably like have discussed this on your other interviews, but I'll give like a very rough overview of how data science works in a lot of these tech companies. Generally, what you have is you have the product team, like with product managers, you have software engineers, like engineering managers, and data scientists often form kind of like this triangle of like the three technical areas that like drive a product forward. And, you know, some like you also have product designers, you also have user researchers, but like generally like that's kind of like most companies, the core. And the way it's usually organized, you have like specific products, and like within products, you have that core team. So like the newsfeed has like someone who's in charge of product, and you have product managers on every surface. Same thing for engineering, same thing for data science. They kind of work in this like triumvirate, so to speak. What you end up missing in that type of environment, and like everything you use on Facebook has that type of structure. So like the team that works on like the marketplace app really just focuses on marketplace. Like they don't care about what happens on newsfeed. They don't care about how many stories you post. They only care about how like much you like purchasing and selling items. So what ends up happening in this type of environment, and I think we actually saw this happen in my first year in the team, is there is kind of a broader, higher level view that no one's really looking at. And this ended up happening, like I said, in my first year, where like some of our like core metrics, you know, how much time people spend start like, you know, dropping a little bit in a way that no one expected. And I think at that point, like our like chief of product or kind of went over to like the various teams, like, hey, you know, this metric's going down. Do you know why? And they're like, we don't know. Like our group's metrics are doing great. And they went over to marketplace team and they're like, hey, why is this metric going? They're like, we don't know. Our marketplace metrics are doing great. And so at that point, I think I was just like the one person on the team. And like at that point, we started getting a lot more investment, is that we realized that like looking at individual products doesn't really let you see that big picture and kind of look at that type of thing. So to start, what the team was responsible for was kind of, as you described, looking across the various things that the Facebook app offers and kind of understanding like how these things connect and things like that. So like as an example, one analysis we might do is, you know, we have to make trade-offs between different products. So like often if you make one better, you make one a little bit worse. So if you encourage people to post more cat photos, it might mean that they watch fewer videos. And so these things often trade off. And like those are the types of things that we spend a lot of time thinking about. Over a longer period of time, it kind of that was like more of the reactive type of work. It became a little bit more proactive, where we're like, hey, like we're actually looking across this broad landscape. Like, what's the next thing we should focus on? So like Facebook's focus on like the younger population was something that kind of like came out of our team, where we're like, hey, we're looking at the data, like here's like a gap, here's like some products that we should build to bridge that gap. And then the product teams end up spending some time on that.
Oh, that's really cool. And now, what is your mission at Instacart? So why I ask is I can definitely relate to the struggles of grocery shopping. And I know that actually when I lived 7 years in the UK, and actually this whole online grocery shopping there, it's huge. Here in North America, based on what I observed, less so. Probably it's also quite regional in that sense. But I know that in the UK, it was very sophisticated, even on the online user experience level. And I talked to quite a few people in Ocado, Asda, Tesco, Waitrose, data professionals there. And it was really, really interesting to see how they optimize user experience on many levels, leveraging data. So what is your mandate now over at Instacart? What is your general mission? Why did they bring you on board?
Yeah, so I guess I'll give a little bit of background here as well. So at Instacart, it's effectively like a four-sided market. So you have like that's the way we think about it. So you have like customers who buy the groceries. You have shoppers who are actually in the stores picking the groceries. You have advertisers who like put ads on our platform, and we generate a good amount of revenue from that. And then there's like the actual stores that we partner with to do all the shopping at. And so we call that the e-commerce pillar, and that's the pillar that I kind of came in to support on the data science side. And so there's like a few things that pillar does, but I think the main thing that we're trying to do now is build this platform of services. Whereas previously we often kind of partnered directly with like a lot of retailers like Costco or Sprouts or Wegmans or any of these stores in the US. And we partnered with them to like kind of help like build out their offerings, like build features that they then adopt into their storefronts. But we're actually trying to lean towards this model where rather than like building one-off features that work for Wegmans or one-off features that work for Costco, we're actually building like broader features that all of these retailers can kind of plug into and use like the way they see fit. So if like a store like Costco feels like they have an amazing group of shoppers in their stores, but their catalog is really bad, like they don't need to get the whole Instacart thing. They can just pick out the catalog. They can like pick out the delivery. They can do the shopping themselves, and it's all going to plug in. So that's kind of like the vision that we're aiming towards. We're not quite there yet. And so, I think data is pretty instrumental here because like, honestly, I think the main advantage that Instacart has over, there are a lot of people in the space, as you mentioned. And the main advantage Instacart has is that we have a wealth of data from like the regular Instacart B2C side. And then we can kind of leverage that data and figure out what things we need to build and how we need to optimize things when we're building this platform.
Would you say that Instacart's challenges as an organization, would that be similar for like a traditional business's main issues and bottlenecks when it comes to becoming more data driven? Or do you think it's more similar to some of the new businesses like Facebook or Netflix or Amazon?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It is actually, I would say it's in between because you have some of both. Instacart, like the actual company itself, is much closer to Facebook or Google in that type of way. A lot of our execs even come from those areas. Like a lot of our tech stack is kind of lifted from those companies. And
I know that their director of data science has used to be at Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, even my boss, the VP of data science, like she came from Google, so it's a lot of us here.
There you go.
Yeah, so I think we do have a lot of that there, and I think the actual company itself like has that type of data driven and kind of like innovative culture beneath it. But a lot of the stores that we partner with, like kind of the ones I mentioned, like Instacart's like a 10, I'm going to get this wrong. It sounds good, but it's like a 10, 15-year-old company, much like Facebook or like Google. A lot of these stores have been around for like 40, 50, 60 years, right? So they've been doing stuff a long time. They figured everything out, and they figured it out in a time when data and technology didn't really exist. And when it comes to like their in-store experience and the way they sell stuff in the grocery store, like it is hyper optimized. They know exactly what they're doing. They know all the tricks. But then when it comes to the digital experience, which is what we're trying to help them build, it is a bit of a shift to go from like knowing everything about a experience where like, digital data isn't really necessary to now being forced effectively by like the way the world is moving to shift into this digital space. And in the digital space, you don't quite know what you're doing because you haven't spent 50 years perfecting it. But you still are kind of in that mindset where like you feel like you know your business really well. And so I think that's kind of like some of the challenge that we have there. And, sometimes like we want to like run experiments, or we're like, hey, we have like this test that proves this idea works. And they're like, well, we've been trying this in our store for 30 years and we know that idea doesn't work. And so like, it's kind of like, how do you like have that conversation?
So this directly ties into my question about your take on the industry today, because you've been basically in data for a while now. How did you see the industry change? What do you observe to be the key challenges and opportunities in data analytics today for large businesses?
It's kind of a very broad question. I mean, I think like honestly, data is so commonplace these days. That's like actually very easy for almost any business to like develop the base level of data understanding, like kind of to the point where like maybe I'm exaggerating, but the way that like typing was 40 years ago, or like even having a website was 10 or 15 years ago. Like, you know, for a while, it's probably very hard to have a website, and you need to like hire a developer and you have to do a whole thing. Just like 15 years ago, it was actually hard to have data. You need to hire a whole thing. Now there's like a lot of plugin services, and there's like, you basically don't need to have any data in-house. You can basically like pay out to like 5 or 6 companies and just have everything kind of work for you, and maybe have 1 or 2 people working on it. So to get to like the very base level of data comprehension for a company these days is just super easy. Getting to that next level gets a little bit tougher because there's like a variety of challenges you're facing. One is, you know, having folks who kind of can really deeply understand the data and like build out models and machine learning and things like that. You often like hear this meme about like, you know, executives who are like, oh yeah, AI or ML, like buzzwords, like, you know, build out for me in 2 days. Actually like super, super hard to do. So that's where like things have to get a bit more specialized. And then on the other side of the coin, which is like more of what I spend my time on, is actually honestly kind of like data storytelling. You know, not to plug the name of your podcast here. But it's basically like, how do you use this data to tell the right story and make the right business decision? Because like 5 people can look at the same piece of data and come out with 5 different conclusions. Like it's very rare that's an obvious conclusion. And so you need someone to kind of like pull the pieces together, figure out what the next thing is to look at, and like actually have the right decision for the business. So I think like those are probably the 2 biggest opportunities.
Okay, so much to unpack here. So let me talk about data storytelling. So data storytelling, sometimes people refer to data storytelling as that methodology or process of like pointing at data sets and telling a story about it to drive to a specific conclusion. Now, we like to think about storytelling in a little bit more holistic way, to use that word holistic, because I mean, your storytelling is always embedded in a certain context. So we're talking about human beings. And in that sense, there's always a relationship present. You are always presenting a story from a certain position. So this ties into those things that you mentioned about getting to the next level in the business. So can we just unpack this a little bit? What do you mean by when you want to get to the next level from the basic comprehension of data? What does it mean, do you think, for a business to be data driven? It's actually an interesting question that I like to ask sometimes, because it's not like there's an answer out there that's officially determined what data drivenness actually means. So what do you think? What is your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a prepared answer here, because I actually did talk about this about a year ago. So I think to me, like there's a lot of businesses that I think they're data driven, and the way they think that is because they look at data when they're making decisions. It's actually like a little bit more nuanced, because what I found is like there's some places that think they're data driven, and the way they kind of behave in what they perceive to be a data driven way is they like make a decision, and then they kind of like look at the data afterwards to confirm that decision, which is like the worst possible thing you can do. Like that's even worse. Like you should just not even look at the data. You should just say, hey, I believe in this decision. Let's just do it. There's some places that I think actually like are a little bit better. And this is where I'd say like 80% of companies probably are. And that they look at data and they use that data as kind of like an input into decision making, where it's like, hey, we want to change the way our website looks. Let's run a test to see whether blue or red is better. You run a test, blue is better. Cool, let's go with blue. Like that's actually like a pretty good place to be in. 80% is probably an overestimate. I would say like a good amount of companies do this. I think, I don't know, like Instacart does this often. I would say like it's a good place to be in. I would say what really means to be data driven, and I saw this I think a little bit more at Facebook, and Facebook maybe even like was too data driven in this regard, where you actually like use the data to figure out what the next thing is to do, rather than saying we should do this thing. Let's look at the data to figure out what the product is. So it's more like kind of what I mentioned before, where we're like looking at experiment results, and we're like, hey, in a lot of these experiments, when we like cut them by younger people, they're having less of an effect. So like as a result, we should build like young people specific strategies. And so that is kind of like you're looking at the data and like you're forming your strategy off the data, versus like forming a strategy and just kind of like looking at data to figure out what the right things to do. I think both are good. I actually think it's like pretty hard to get your data and the data literacy of the folks who are running the company to a point where you can like actually use the data to inform the strategy. But I think if the more you lean in that direction, I'm a little biased because it's my job, but the more you lean in that direction, I think the better your strategies will end up being.
So going from basic comprehension of data to that state where you said roughly 80% of the companies might be when they reflect and kind of incorporate data into everyday decision making, all the way to the more advanced stage of the predictive / prescriptive analytical applications.
Exactly.
So where do you see the key bottlenecks here? So what do you think that if you imagine a data leader, a senior executive whose job is to drive that data drivenness in the company, what do you think are the key challenges and what do you think are those areas where you guys have the hardest time of actually making progress?
Yeah, I'd say there's three bottlenecks. One is and this is one of them like struggling with a little bit today, is like the availability of data. And so like just having, I think one thing I took for granted a little bit at Facebook and Google is they have like amazing teams of data engineers who build these, elaborate pipelines and tables that kind of provide data scientists with all of the raw tools and materials they need to actually do these types of insights. At smaller companies, I think a lot of companies don't even know what data engineers are. And so they like hire data scientists and they hope that they can like do their best, but you really need people whose job it is to actually like put a lot of this data in order and make it easily usable. So that's probably like the main bottleneck. But for companies who have gotten over that bottleneck, that one's like a little bit more easily solved. You can just throw money at the problem, hire a lot of data engineers, they'll do that for you. The other bottlenecks are a little harder to solve. So I think one, and they're kind of linked together a little bit. I think one is like executive buy-in. So I think you need people who, like someone who's in some senior leadership position who kind of buys into the fact that you want data to solve problems, and that like if you have feelings and those feelings aren't reflected in what the numbers actually show, then like maybe those feelings weren't the right feelings. And like very often in my career, like Facebook, Instacart as well, I've seen places where like, VPs of product are like, hey, this is the direction. I feel really strongly about this. Like I've looked at these pieces of evidence. Here's where we should go. And some like super junior data scientist comes to them like, hey, actually I ran an experiment. Turns out you're wrong. And the really good ones will go like, I was not expecting that. Okay, let's go a different direction. And you don't see that very often, especially not in like older school industries. So I'd say that's like one bottleneck. But in a lot of these companies like Facebook, Google, Instacart, et cetera, like a lot of the execs actually are very data savvy. So the main bottleneck I've seen in these industries is actually the data leaders themselves and the data scientists themselves. It's very, I don't want to say it's easy because it's still hard because it's a hard job, but it's like easy to kind of just like do things where if like, especially a very strongly minded product manager is like, hey, like here's an idea I have. And, they're often like very charismatic and they kind of get everyone behind them. Like, here's my idea, let's do it. The data science is like, yeah, I'll run the experiment. The experiment sort of says the thing you were saying, like, let's do it. It's going to be great. I think the thing you really need to do is kind of almost like work with the product team, but also be like your own independent person and be like, actually, here's what I think we should do. Or like, I have this completely different thing and we should figure out how to prioritize between the two of them. I think it's really easy to kind of fall behind like a leader, like a product manager, like an engineering manager, and kind of just like get swept up in their wake and do that thing. And often it's not a bad idea. Usually the product is successful and like you're part of the team and it's great. But I feel like the biggest insights I've seen were the ones where actually the data scientists kind of like cut through the mold. I don't know if that's an expression, but like with the ones where the data scientists like really were like cross-cutting and were like, hey, I don't think that's the right idea. Let's do this completely different thing. And had to maybe push really hard against the organization. But in the end, like those were the best outcomes.
Now, this is really cool. So we have basically these. So you mentioned the availability of data. This is a problem and you can throw money at it, get more data engineers. Cool. So this is less exciting for us to talk about. Now, it'd be the executive buy-in. So let's just spend maybe a few minutes on this. What skills and techniques, strategies, methodologies do you think are needed to get executive buy-in? So if, let's say, a company is not as lucky or advanced, where you already have this, where you have the data-savvy executives, what do you think from your personal experience, or maybe just your personal take, what do you think should be prioritized in these cases? What skills should be built? What do you think can be done about getting more executive buy-in?
You mean like what skills in the executives themselves?
I would actually be interested in what you think a data leader should do in this case. What should they bring to the table? Where should they maybe develop a skill? Maybe best practice from a certain area? Like any reflection that you have on this would be interesting.
Yeah, I'd say maybe the first skill. So I think maybe to answer the other question, like there are certain things I think are I mean, I don't know if intrinsic's the right word, but like intrinsic in a lot of like executives who are non-data science that kind of makes them be data savvy leaders. Things like humility, things like, desire to like do a lot of research and like read a lot of things. Often product decks are like, I don't want to say they're simple, but it's like, hey, here's a product we should build. Here's a design mock. Data engineering decks are like, 30 pages long. Like here's a nuance, there's a nuance, there's a nuance. So it does take a lot of kind of like time and effort to do that type of thing. And so maybe to turn that back to your question, the thing that data leaders I think can do is like when they look for a new job, you're doing interviews, and often you're going to be doing an interview with like your product partner or things like that. Like these are things that you can suss out. The interviews go two ways, right? So like they're interviewing for the job, but you should also be interviewing the people you're going to be working with as to like, how they've made data-driven decisions. A question I always love to ask in interviews is, tell me about the top data insight that the DS team has had in the last year, like from the product person. And you can't really like BS your way out of that question, because you can't say, oh, I love data. Like that's a really easy answer. But like if you have listened to the team enough to be able to describe in depth like the top insight, then you probably are actually listening, and like, it's probably going to work out. If you can't, then it's going to be a little rough. But the other things, yeah, I think it's kind of like a case by case basis. I would say, like, I think you earlier talked about relationship building. I think if you have like a leader on the product or engineering side or an executive who is like open to listening to this stuff, it's about building that relationship and building that trust with them. And sometimes I think data leaders are like, there's often this meme in data science, like you shouldn't be a support function. You should be like, leading things in this way or that way. I think when you like start out in a role, I think it's actually kind of okay to like, in some ways, be a support function to develop that trust. Like if the product leader has like a question that they've been like looking for the answer for a year, even if you don't think it's a good use of time, just like help them answer the question. Like spend 2 weeks on it, have your team spend a couple of revs on it, get them an answer. And at that point, they'll be like, okay, well, for a year I've been asking for this. This person just came in. They got me the answer to this. Maybe it was a stupid question. Maybe it wasn't. But then they are like, okay, maybe this person knows what they're doing. And when you come to them later on with like, I think you're wrong, we should do it this way, they'll remember that moment, and it'll kind of be a better relationship.
So you mentioned that there's this meme about, okay, are we a support function, or should we drive change really assertively and come with the most innovative ideas all the time? And it's kind of like the question between humility and assertiveness, like which one, which path? And then it's an interesting conversation, because a lot of time the answer lies somewhere in between. In fact, these things should not be mutually exclusive. One of the other podcast guests, also a great champion of the podcast, Pete Williams, who's the director of data and online at Penguin Random House, the publishing house. And he had a great data story that he shared with us about his system of creating this data literate ecosystem. And in that, he had this concept of the data consigliere, which I really liked, from The Godfather, that basically how you want to position yourself is, you are the ultimate support function, but with a lot of actual influence in the business. So my question to you would be that, what do you think are the qualities of the ideal data transformation leader who can actually implement and drive change? You already mentioned some of those things, but if you needed to list the qualities, or maybe the virtues, if we can use that word, which is basically a habit of character, what do you think that the most successful really embody in this area?
Yeah, I'll say the two probably most important characteristics, I think, and this has been a way that's worked for me and that I've seen work for people. It's possible there are other ways that work, but for me, it's actually, I would say, flexibility and pragmatism. And again, like I do want to caveat, like I've seen people who are not flexible, not pragmatic, and like super principled, and they've actually done very well in their careers and they've influenced leaders. So like, this isn't the only way of doing it. But what I've seen, often is that people who like are very inflexible about things, or like, I don't think things should be done in this way, or like, I really don't think my team should be working on this. Like, absolutely not. It's just, it creates like this tense, like give and take relationship. Whereas I feel like your relationship with your product partners and your engineering partners should be like, I don't want to say like a friendship because you're like coworkers, but like, I think it should be like it should be a little bit of give and take. And I think a lot of DS leaders in particular, I found, have difficulty with the give, because they feel like every time they're giving, they're kind of going more towards that dark place of being a support function. But as you mentioned, like it is a little bit of both. Like I think all functions are support functions in some way and leading functions in some other ways. And what I found is that if you really actually, I found that most people like to talk about leading, but like actually when they're given the chance to do it, they don't like always take advantage of it. And I found the opposite, that like if you actually want to lead something, like everyone will get out of your way and be happy to let you do it, unless you're like leading something that's like a terrible idea. Like generally, I found that people like often really are happy when people like go lead things. And I've done that through my career, and I've like been surprised by how receptive people are to it. So I would say like you should like be a member, like, you know, be a member of the team, be a member of the family, like do the support stuff you need to do. And then kind of take advantage of those leadership opportunities as they come up, and don't be afraid to step up into that role, because I think you'll be surprised with how well people will receive it.
That's well said. Well said. So we talked about that tension between assertiveness and humility, and really being a support function, or you really like assume that position of purveyor of truth and then drive change. Now, from your perspective, and also from your experience driving that change, how important were soft skills, actual communication, building relationships, building trust, and also the idea of storytelling and persuasion and influence? How important do you think those things are when it comes to successful data leadership today?
Yeah, a little bit of a leading question, because I think you know what the answer is, but yeah, extremely important. I would say, except in rare cases, much more important than technical skills. I feel like for technical skills, there's like a baseline that I think everyone should have. Like you shouldn't deliver wrong insights. You should know like the basics. Like if someone's like, hey, you know, is there a correlation between these two things? Or can you help me set up this experiment? Like you should know how to do that stuff. But I think it's like very rare that deeper technical skills are better use of your time than getting to like a good level in soft skills. So yeah, communication, you know, cross-functional partner management, all of those things. The thing that I guess I'll use this time to talk about, a thing that probably people don't talk about as often, which is what at Facebook I think we called having a nose for impact, which is you know, trying to not just like having good relationships, but also like having the wherewithal to understand which projects are the best places to use your time. And this becomes especially important as your manager, because then your opinion of these things then trickles down to your team. And if you have your team working on the wrong projects, then you're going to be in a really bad spot. So this one's like pretty tough to develop. And I would say like, I don't think I've actually developed it quite yet at Instacart. I've, you know, only been here 5 months. But I think it's kind of about like looking at what has been successful across the org, reading a lot of like memos written by leaders, like watching the all hands, and kind of, I think a lot of people like read these things and think about these things and they just look at the results. They're like, oh, the CEO said this. Okay, cool. But often what I like to do and what I encourage people to do is actually like look one level deeper of like, okay, why is the CEO spending her 30 minutes talking about this specific thing? Like, why not any of these other things? Why is this thing so important? And I think I would say there's probably like a 10, 20% hit rate, but every once in a while you can kind of like get that insight of something that is actually happening that is not obvious, and spend some time working on that, and you can like get ahead of a trend. I feel like that's like a really understated skill to have.
Mm-hmm. And then in this sense, so how much of that preparation and identification of these key projects are more passive when you do research on your own, maybe, you know, find certain documents, and how much of it is actually sitting down with people and building that interpersonal connection and relationship?
You can do, but I think you have to actually do both. I think, yeah, if you sit like just reading documents in an empty room, like you're gonna maybe learn some things, but then like at the end of the day, like it's again very rare that like you deliver an analysis that's so compelling that you can just blast it out into the ether and like take a vacation, and then like the company starts moving and grinding its gears because of your amazing insight. Often it's like it's often kind of like you have to follow through. It's like a stakeholder management type of thing. So you have to deliver the insight. You have to convince people that you're right. You have to kind of like work with them to figure out what to do. You have to follow up with them. It's things like that. So I have seen a lot of times where people like have a great insight. They've done all this like passive pre-work, then they like throw it over the wall and they expect that everyone will jump, and no, and it kind of just like lands in the grass and no one really cares. So you do have to kind of like follow it over the wall and, you know, follow through on the whole thing. And that's where the meetings come in.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So that's on the leadership level. So we're talking about the data leaders, the
Even
directors.
even if you're an IC, like if you have like some sort of analysis and you present it to like, I mean, yeah, like maybe you're not going to spend a lot of time talking to like a director of product. I mean, maybe it will, it depends on the company. Like if you're working with a PM and you're like, hey, I think here's an amazing insight. And the PM's like, okay, cool, let's move on. Like that's not going to land you any impact. Like you need to actually like be like, okay, what can we do about it? Like who can I work with to launch your projects? What experiments can we run? So you do need to kind of like have that follow through.
Mm-hmm. And then when you think about your team, so we talk about data leaders who are identifying the projects, who are communicating with the business maybe on a higher level. But we keep hearing this, that even the level of data scientists and data analysts, who people want to train to business analysts as well, that the soft skills are lacking, that it's the one thing that really keeps these organizations and data functions from fulfilling their potential, because they have amazingly intelligent people with PhDs, the amazing skill set in handling technology and platforms that are building the most fascinating products and services and platforms. But at the same time, their lack of savvy in business and interpersonal communication, sometimes it stands in the way of them extracting that value from analytics. So in your experience, is this an issue? And if so, what do you think are the ways to address this currently, through training, through maybe just exposing them to certain situations? What is your take on this?
Ooh, I mean, it's definitely an issue. I think there's like many soft skills that are important, and like it's, you know, every once in a while you meet someone who's like really good at all of them. And sometimes there's like, I would say there's different ones. Like one is like communicating directly with your stakeholders. One is what I mentioned, like figuring out the right places to spend your time. And each like failure at each one of these like leads to a different like non-ideal relationship. Like you could have a relationship where you're actually like an excellent communicator, and like every time your product partner is like, hey, we should do this thing, you're like, yes, amazing, let's do it. And then you do it and the experiment shows some result and you're like, this is such a great launch, and you launch it. And it turns out like actually like you really should have told them that it was a bad idea. Or you should spend your time somewhere else. So you can be a great communicator and still have like it won't be a bad relationship because you both like each other, but like it's bad for the business. The how to actually train people is, I would say, much harder. I would say like this is going to be like maybe like a hack, but like the hack is just to hire people who are good at these types of things, and really interview for this and like really test for this in the interview loops. And I don't mean like ICs. Like I think it's fine for like junior or even senior ICs to see this as a growing opportunity. But when you're hiring managers for your team and when you're hiring directors, like you need, like this needs to be a skill set they have, like especially if your team is weak in this, like their skill set needs to complement that. And what the biggest failure mode here I've seen is when the team is not great at like communication and stakeholder management and things like that, and then you bring in a director who's also not good at that thing, and maybe that director is like a technical wizard. It's going to be really bad because the team's just going to double down on like focusing on like analytical work and not really focusing on the soft skills. And so yeah, there might be better ways, but like the quickest hack I've seen is hiring a leader with complementary skill sets who can kind of train the team.
Absolutely. Actually, this really makes me think about my experience in consulting for small AI and data analytics companies, small startups, with people with probably IQ around like 160. They had like very in-depth technical knowledge. They built amazing things, and still they couldn't really put it to market. They couldn't really engage customers with it. So I like to think about some of these data functions in a similar way, that you are ultimately entrepreneurs. It's a business within a business, and your client is the business who's paying the bills. And then if you start to be kind of self-serving in that sense, of not really connecting to the real needs and desires of your target audience, well, that will bite you back in the long run, or even in the short run, right?
That's exactly the right way to think about it. Actually, honestly, like that one of the reasons I took this particular role was I actually thought about the reverse way, where I feel like over the years I've like learned how to kind of like develop those soft skills and work with cross-functional partners really well. And this role actually partners with external clients and businesses. So I'm like, okay, well, I figure out this thing, like maybe it'll translate to this other thing. So almost like the reverse of what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then this kind of ties into my next question, because a lot of our members would like to really focus on developing those soft skills because they want to take advantage of all these new opportunities that are being enabled now by technology, because it's been accelerating. In the 90s, for data transformation leader, the challenges were different than today. And what do you see as the greatest opportunities right now? What makes you excited about some of the up and coming trends, new technologies, what what will be enabled from your perspective in the next couple of years, because everyone's talking about how the 2020s will be the decade of data, but we know that it'll be these trends as it usually goes. There will be a lot of winners, but also an equal, maybe even a higher amount of losers, unfortunately, as it usually the case. So what are you most excited about, and what do you identify as the key trends to really pay attention to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll maybe give answer maybe a slightly different question. So like, I think you mentioned the proliferation of data. Mm-hmm. I think what that means is that there's just a lot of different industries and opportunities for people. And I think I would say like 10 years ago, data science wasn't as much of a thing, but now there's like a bunch of people like directors, VPs, like a lot of leaders in that area. And I think the perk here is actually that you will get to like interact with these leaders. And like for me, I'm not really good like learning from like a textbook or a class or anything like that. The way I learn is by pattern matching. And so like most of the things I've learned have actually been from the leaders that I've worked with. Like maybe as an example, maybe this answers like an earlier question, like what you can do to develop these skills. There's a point early in my career at Google where I was really bad at sending emails. It sounds like silly because like it's so easy to send emails, but like my emails, they were like unclear or they were like too curt or whatever. And there was a point which my manager, who was like the director of the area, and this guy, I think he wasn't even like I don't even know if English was his first language. He wasn't like an amazing, like you would not think he's an amazing communicator, but he somehow actually had a lot of influence with his partners and things like that. So he's like, okay, I want you to sit behind me for the next 2 hours and you're going to watch every email I send and every text I send. And I just sat behind him at his desk in his office and I watched him send these emails. And I learned so much from that 1 or 2 hours. I'm like, that it really actually just set the stage for like the rest of my career. If I didn't have those 2 hours, I actually don't know if I would have even like developed those soft skills. So then, yeah, my advice from that is like find people. It can be your manager, it can be someone else in the org, and just like meet with them and like ask them to give you advice, or maybe like even ask for like you have pair coding sessions. Like why not pair communication sessions? Like ask them for help, ask them for feedback on your emails. It's hard to get that because like only often the people see your emails are like you and another person. Or if you're in meetings together, ask them for feedback on your communication style. If you find someone who's like generous enough to actually give you real feedback rather than like, oh yeah, you're doing well. That's like something that you should really treasure.
That's such a cool insight because I found the same over my career. I always say that I think email is the most dangerous and risky tool that has been developed in the past 60 years. And it's really, really easy to use it the wrong way. And we won't have time to really dive into all the aspects of communication because it's mostly emotional. So communication is a really emotional platform. And then people are the least charitable when they read your emails. So it always, you have to imagine that my email will be read in the worst possible light imaginable.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, that's really cool. Maybe we can talk about it some other time. But Gene, this was a really cool interview. I want to be respectful of your time as well. I know you have the hard stuff coming up. As a final insight to our audience, what would be your personal recommendations for aspiring data leaders who want to be really successful in the next couple of years?
Ooh, no pressure with these big questions. I guess my final recommendation is, this is going to sound really cliche, but a lot of people say, find something you're passionate about. That's probably my advice, is to find something you're passionate about and do that thing. And it doesn't have to be a product. It doesn't have to be like a particular tool or analysis. It's just like being in a role where every day you're kind of like, hey, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to tackle the problems that we're tackling. And I think being in that type of environment will actually like cultivate your desire to learn more, your desire to emulate people. So I would say, like, if you don't like your job, especially if you work in data science or engineering, there's so many opportunities out there. Like you owe it to yourself to find something you love. It can be within the same team, it can be within the same company, maybe outside the company. So keep trying. I think until like I got to Facebook, I mentioned like having those small tweaks. So like constantly evaluate things in your career, like make small tweaks. And that like, hey, I really like this part of the job. I don't like this part. Like find something that makes you like that part. And then you will find some like the next tweak you want to make. So that is my advice. Don't like stay in one place and kind of suck it up. Find something that really speaks to you.
That's a great guiding light and a North Star. So thank you so much for insights, Gene. This was a really cool conversation. And
thanks for chatting.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope to have you just sharing your insights with our community in some other way, maybe moving forward. So thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Would love that.
Take care.
See you later.
Bye-bye.